Today in Bits, we're going to talk about tile. One of the first choices you're going to have to make is the layout for the tile, and this will help you decide which tiles to buy. You can cover a whole lot of area with a really large tile, but you could also get a mosaic sheet to cover a large area with a bunch of small tiles together. If you want a more intricate design, you're going to have to buy individual pieces and lay them by hand. As you're selecting your tile, be sure to look at the intended use for that specific product. Even though it looks nice, it may not be made for the inside of a shower or even for a floor to walk on. But regardless, you want to get your tile and do a dry layout on the floor so you can figure out how the tile is going to interact with fixtures like sinks or toilets, and how it'll interact with transitions to other rooms. Then when you go to buy the tile, generally the rule of thumb is to get 10% more than you think you're going to need. Anytime you make cuts on a tile, there is waste, so plan for that accordingly when you buy it. Once you've decided on your tile and your layout, the next step is to prepare the subfloor. This surface needs to be flat, clean, and dry. If there's any residue from an old floor, make sure to get a scraper and scrape it completely flat. Then if you've got any low spots, you want to fill those with a self-leveling cement. And after that, make sure to sweep and vacuum the floor to get rid of any dust and debris. If your subfloor is made of plywood, you're going to need to add something moisture resistant to that, like a cement board. But personally, I like to use an uncoupling membrane. There's one specifically by Schluter Systems called Ditra. And this is a layer that goes in between the subfloor and the tile and allows them to move independently just slightly. That way, when the subfloor expands and contracts with moisture, the tile won't crack. To install the Ditra, the first step is to lay down a layer of thin-set mortar. You're definitely going to need a 5-gallon bucket and a mixer that you can chuck up into a drill. Using the flat side of a trowel, lay down a thin scratch coat of thin-set, no larger than 3 feet by 3 feet. After that, add a little bit more thin-set with the notch side of the trowel, holding it at about a 45-degree angle, and add some lines. The specific trowel you should use is based on the specific type of Ditra that you're using, so check out their recommendations. Starting in one corner of the room, press the Ditra down into the thin-set, and then pull up the corner just to make sure that you get full coverage. Once you've got full coverage, go ahead and lay the Ditra down across the entire room. Once you've got the entire room covered in Ditra, you actually don't have to wait. You can start laying tile down immediately. Once you get a small area of thin-set laid down on top of the Ditra, you can start laying tile. Gently press the tiles into the thin-set and then add spacers in between the tiles. If you have even spacing in between your tiles, you're going to have even grout lines later. As you move along adding tiles to your pattern, be sure to wipe up any thin-set that squeezes up in between them. It's a lot easier to clean up when it's wet. It's a great idea to always have a bucket of clean, cool water and a sponge to clean up while you're working. As you move along with your pattern, you're also going to want to check the level of your tiles, especially if you're working with really large ones. Having a 4-foot level handy is great to make sure that all of your tiles have a level surface. Regardless of the pattern or tile that you choose, eventually you're probably going to have to cut a tile. And to do that, you're going to need a tile saw. Now these come in a bunch of different variations. There's simple ones that you score the top and then crack the tile by hand. There's electric wet saws that will cut them very similar to a miter saw, and you can also put a masonry disc in an angle grinder and cut it by hand. And after you've waited for those tile to be fully set in place, it's time to fill the cracks with grout. The grout is a great way to either highlight or hide the seams in between the tiles. Grout is available in a bunch of different colors, so be sure to check out all the options to figure out which one looks best with your tile. Laying the grout is very similar to putting down the thin set, but instead of a trowel, you use something called a float. The float has a pretty hard surface and it allows you to push the grout down in between the tiles fully. When you go to mix the grout, again, be sure to follow the mixing instructions on the bag, but you'll definitely need a 5-gallon bucket and the mixer chucked up in your drill. After you get it pressed into a small area, go back and wipe off the top surface with a sponge. The sponge needs to be damp but not soaking wet in clean water. When you grout the tile, be sure to fill every space in between every tile and get it flush with the top of the tile surface. You probably don't want to fill the gap around the outside of the room in case any of the wood in the room expands and contracts a little bit. If you do need to fill that space, you can use a silicone caulking, often getting it color matched exactly to the grout color. After you're completely finished with all the grout, again follow the instructions, but you're probably going to have to wait at least 24 hours before walking on it. And the last step is to seal the grout. This is really important because if you have a light colored grout, it will get stained by dirt and foot traffic. The sealer is a protective layer on top of the grout which will help it stay the color that you wanted it to be. There's a bunch of different ways to apply the sealer, but really it doesn't need to go on top of the tile, it just needs to go on the grout. Usually you can get a small brush and just paint it onto all the grout lines. Often the sealer that you use has to cure for 72 hours before you can walk on it, but again, just follow the instructions. Laying tile can be a whole lot of work, it can take a lot of time, but it really does transform a room. If you've got some more tips and tricks on laying tile, please leave them down in the comments and we can all learn together. Huge thanks to Lowe's for sponsoring this video. We've got a whole playlist of other Bits videos for you to check out, and we'll be back really soon with a new project. See you then.